Hey, this is Tom, and I'm here with Attack Magazine to explore the new Ableton Push. So before we dive into talking about some of the new features on the new Push, let's chat a bit about exactly what Push is and why it's really cool. So this is the third iteration of the Push, and the Push has always been about getting you away from the computer. It's all about workflow and getting you much more focused on making music instead of staring at a computer screen. And there's a whole bunch of things on the Push that help you to do that, and we'll explore those along the way. And the new Push just adds a bunch of features that make getting away from the computer a whole bunch easier. So let's dive in and take a look at what we can do. So first off, one of the first things you're going to do when you are making music with the Push is you're going to want to start a new session or possibly load an existing session. And so there's a new button here that opens up your sets on the Push and lets you create a new blank set. Cool. So now we've got a set loaded up. The first thing that we're going to want to do is add some kind of sound. So I'm going to press this slightly redesigned button over here that lets you open up the browser and load in some sounds. So anyone who's familiar with the previous versions of Push will be familiar with this, but if you're not, we've got Ableton's browser over here where I can browse through all the sounds that I have in Ableton. I can browse through my collections, my devices, instruments, and effects, and load things up here. So I'm just going to go in and start with a drum sound. Loading up drums, I load up a drum rack on the Push that lets me play in some drum sounds. At the top, I've got a basic drum sequencer here. I can switch out of this hot swap mode to see the devices on the screen. I'm just going to program in a basic drum pattern. Just a basic kick drum for now will do. If I want to change the length of this clip, at the moment I've got a 4-bar clip. I can go into the clip mode on the screen and change that to be 2 bars long. So let's load in a new sound. I'm going to hit this Add New button. And we're going to look at something that is new on the Push, the new version of Push, which is MPE-capable pads. So I'm going to load a new MIDI track. And I'm going to go over to the sounds in the browser. And I'm going to navigate to MPE sounds. I should probably mention, by the way, at this point, that I'm using this new Jogwheel, which is a new way of navigating around in the browser on the Push. So the Jogwheel has many different functions depending on where you are in the Push, but you can turn it to scroll through things, and you can click to load a sound. You can also click this left and right, and we'll see what that does in a moment as well. So I'm going to load up the stock cinema pad. So the note grid on the Push lets us play notes, and we can press the scale button to set this to be in a particular key. This is something that will be familiar to Push users. But new in this version of Push is the fact that these pads are MPE capable. So what that means is that there are various degrees of expression that we can get out of these pads. You need to work with a sound that is going to interpret that MPE data. So I've loaded up an MPE capable sound. And then there are various kinds of things that you can do. So first, I'm just going to set this to be in a particular key. So now all the notes that I'm going to play are going to be in key. So I can play a note, and each one of these pads has multiple dimensions of expression. So for example, I can do per note pitch bends. So I can play a note and slide along from left to right on the Push to change the pitch of just that note. So if I play a chord, I can change the pitch of individual notes within that chord, or I can slide the whole chord. And this is actually a really nice way of working with MPE, because when we're in the scale mode, it makes it really easy to slide and keep everything in key. When you're trying to do MPE on a keyboard, you can kind of end up doing these sort of weird finger gymnastics where you're having to shift your fingers to get the chord to kind of work. So Push's in-key grid works really nicely for keeping everything in key. The other thing that we can do is slide up and down on a pad to change the expression of that sound. And depending on the sound that you're using, that's going to be mapped to different things. So again, you can do that on a per note basis. There are some settings that are available for this if I press the settings button and go into the expression tab, where I can change how the pads respond. So for example, I can change out of MPE mode if I want to into aftertouch modes, and I can also change how the pads respond to my playing. For example, do I want it to be in tune anywhere on the pad using the pad mode, or do I want the in tune to location to be wherever I put my finger down? I can also change the width of where it's going to be in tune depending on where I land my finger. I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but there's a lot of customization that you can adjust to control how the pads respond. So let's record in a pattern here along with this basic kick drum. Now, I've played a pattern, but I wasn't recording. Something that's new on the new push is a dedicated capture button. So on previous versions of push, you had to press shift and record, but now I can just hit this dedicated capture button to capture that pattern. I can go into the clip mode and adjust my loop length and loop position. Crop the clip. Also new is a separate edit mode when you're working in clips. So I can hit the button in the top right here to enter the edit mode, where I can do some slightly more detailed editing of the notes. So I can use this Jogwheel to scroll through and select different notes, and I can click it down to add a note to the selection so that I can select multiple notes and then perform various functions on those notes. For example, I could nudge them left and right to adjust the timing. I could change their pitch, their length, the velocity, etc. So let's add something else to this. I'm going to add a new track and navigate to MIDI track, instruments, and I'm going to load up the external instrument device because I want to use this little modular synth that I've got set up here. I'm going to choose the MIDI output and the audio input so that I can send MIDI notes to the synth and get audio back in. Now, one of the first things you'll want to do when you're using some kind of external, particularly analog synthesizer or something like a guitar, is to make sure it's in tune. So I'm going to add the Ableton's tuner device from the audio effects. Navigate all the way to tuner. And you'll see that we have a new visualization for the tuner device on the push screen. Oh, let's load that to a new audio track. So let's just load that again onto the tuner device. Cool. So you can see that we have a new visualization for the tuner directly on the push screen, which makes it really easy to tune external instruments. So if I play a note on this, and I'll play a note of C, you can see that I'm getting something that is definitely not a C. So I need to go in and tune this. And the tuner visualization makes that really easy to see. So, close enough. So now I can play notes on this external synth, and it's going to be in key with the rest of my track. Let's maybe load an arpeggiator onto this. I'll just capture those notes and go in and edit the position. I can hold down Shift to get finer adjustments if I need to. And now this is where the new edit functionality becomes very useful. I can select all of these notes and just nudge them to make sure that they start in the right time. Oops. And adjust their length. Let's just make it a short loop. Change the loop position and the loop length. Cool, so I've got this running through the external synth, but now I want to be able to get this audio down into my session so I can unplug this synth and still work with it. A new feature in the push is that I can hold down Shift and press on a track and freeze that track directly from the push. You'll see it says waiting for external instruments and effects to become silent, so it's just waiting for the synth to get to silence, and then it's going to, in real time, freeze that track by recording that audio in. So I'll say OK. And now it should be frozen. I could, if I click on that again, I can choose to flatten that to a piece of audio. If I go over to the clip, you can now see that that is a piece of audio. Another new feature on the push is the ability to see the session view on the screen. So I can press this new button up here and see my session view directly on the screen. So this is a really cool feature for anyone who uses the push to perform live, because it gives you a lot of context about where you might be in your set, but it's also really useful when you are coming up with ideas and writing to be able to navigate. And I can use the Jogwheel to move around in there, and I can click down to launch or stop clips. And use the push left and right on the Jogwheel to start and stop clips as well. So everything that we've been looking at so far on the push is working with the laptop. And this is how previous editions of push worked. Everything was tethered to the laptop, and you were recording into a session there. Probably the kind of biggest new addition to the push is the addition of a standalone mode. This lets you work with the push entirely by itself, disconnected to the computer. I can go over to the settings here, go to status, and you'll see I have this button that says Start Standalone. At the moment it says Push is controlling live, but I can say Start Standalone. Would I like to start Push Standalone now? I'll say Start. And the push is going to restart, which takes a couple seconds. And I'm now working with a version of Live that's running entirely on the push hardware. This is exactly the same version of Live that I was just using on the computer. It does everything that Live can do, but there is absolutely no need for the computer. I could connect all these disconnect all these cables, which I'm not going to do right now, and pick this up and walk away, because it also has a built-in battery. So you can use this new push entirely disconnected from the computer. But everything else that we've just done works exactly the same. I can press the New Set button to start a new set or load an existing one. I can play notes, I can record them in using Capture, I can see all the various different views and edit clips exactly as I could. Everything is functionally exactly the same as if you were working with the tethered laptop version. Of course, you might have noticed by now that something else that's new in the new version of Push, which is pretty essential when working in standalone mode, is a built-in audio interface. So you can see at the back here, I've got a whole bunch of things connected directly to the push. This is obviously essential when you're working in standalone mode to be able to get input and output, but also works as a regular audio interface when you're connected to the laptop. So on the back of the push, there are a number of inputs and outputs, both audio and MIDI. So over on the right here, we've got the two main outputs, which are going to the speaker at the moment. And then we've got two inputs for connecting, quarter-inch inputs for connecting external instruments. Then there are ADAT ins and outs so that you can connect an ADAT compatible interface to get up to 16 channels of in and out. You've got both MIDI in and out as well. It's just a mini jack MIDI, so you will need a mini jack to 5-DIN cable adapter to work with that. There is a USB input so that you can connect additional MIDI controllers as well if you want to work with maybe a keyboard controller alongside it, and even Ableton control surfaces like the APC40, etc., will just work out of the box in standalone mode. Then, of course, there's the power. You've got USB-C to connect to the computer when working in tethered mode. There are two pedal inputs, which were there on the previous versions of Push. So you've got a sustain pedal and a trigger input. But these have the new feature of also being able to be switched to CV outputs. And you can send up to 4 separate channels of CV out of these two outputs using splitter cables. Then lastly, we have the headphone output and, of course, the power switch. So an important part of working with Push in standalone is the fact that it also has built-in Wi-Fi. And this has a number of different features. First, of course, I need to connect to the Wi-Fi. So in the settings, I can go over to the Wi-Fi tab. I've already connected to my phone, which I'm running as a hotspot, but you can find all the available Wi-Fi networks nearby and connect to those if you haven't already. Once you're connected to the Wi-Fi, if you go over to the software tab, this is where you will do all the software updates for the standalone version of Push, as well as authorize the software with your live account. So mine is, of course, already authorized and up to date, but anytime there's a new update, it will show up in here, and you just hit the button to update, and it will download that over the Wi-Fi. Another very important part of the Wi-Fi is the ability to transfer things between the Push and the computer. So the way that the standalone Push works is it actually has its own built-in hard drive. If I go over to the status tab, I can see that I currently have 170.8 gigs available of a 256 gigabyte hard drive. And so this is where you're going to store all your packs, sounds, etc. So you can install packs directly on the Push. If I go over to add a new sound, say device, and scroll to the packs page, I can go in and see any packs that I've installed and any available packs that I might have to install as well, and install them directly on the Push. In order to transfer files between my computer and the Push, I first need to make sure that they are connected to the same Wi-Fi network. Then if I go over to my laptop, you'll see that there is a new Push tab in the Places section of Live's browser. And if I click into that and make sure I'm connected to the same Wi-Fi network as the Push, you can see there that it has immediately switched to show me the project and user library that are on the Push. If I right-click on this, I can disconnect any currently connected Pushes. And I'll just show you what the process looks like for connecting to the Push. So any available Push will show up in this window. I can click Connect, and it's going to pop up with this little box over here, and then on the Push screen it gives me a little code to input. I type that in, hit Connect, and there it is. I have immediate access to any projects that I have on the Push, as well as the user library on the Push, where I can add things like my own samples, presets, instruments, sounds, etc. So let's do that. Let's go into this projects folder here, and I'll show you how I can just open a project. So the projects that you're seeing here in Live are the projects that are sitting on the internal hard drive in the Push. So if I go in here and just double click on this, it will start copying the files to the computer over Wi-Fi. And once that's done, it's going to, let's maybe just save the session that I've got so we can come back to it later. And Live is going to load up that session that I had on the standalone Push, and I can continue to work in it in Live. If I want to transfer a session back to the Push, so for example, let's find that session that I was just working on, which I've saved on the desktop, I can grab that in Live's browser, just drag it over to the Push, and drop it into the projects folder. Live is going to tell me that I want to make sure I've collected and saved all the sounds, because obviously you want to transfer all the samples over with it. I'll just say continue for now, copies the files to the Push. If I go back over to the Push, which again is in standalone mode, I can press the set browser, and there you can see is that Push demo that I was just working on. I can click that to load it up, and it loads up on the Push. I didn't do a collect all and save in this case, so it's telling me that some media files are missing. So you always want to make sure that you do that before transferring. So I'll say OK, but there is that session that I was just working on. So I think that's it in terms of all the new features on the new version of Push. There's obviously quite a lot of stuff in there, the really big one being standalone mode, but there's a whole bunch of quality of life improvements for the Push itself, whether you're working in tethered mode or standalone mode. In terms of how the new version of the Push is going to work, there are going to be two versions available. There's the tethered version, which will work like the previous Pushes did, where it'll need to be connected to a laptop to use, as well as a separate standalone version, which will work in the tethered mode, but also includes the standalone mode of Push with the computer built in. And these will be available at 2 different price points. Also, at a later date, there will be the ability for people who bought the tethered Push to buy an upgrade kit from Ableton to upgrade that to a fully standalone version. So this has been a brief overview of all the new features on the new Ableton Push. I hope you enjoyed the video.